Today we are going to be discussing the place of humor in D&D games. A lot of people, when they are pitch D&D, the first thing you go to explain the concept might be Lord of the Rings. And I might give something more like, so you get a narrator and the players, and as you're playing, it may sound something like this. As you wander deeper and deeper into a set of caves, the light grows dimmer till the only reason you can see are your elvish eyes. And since a heavy focus is often placed on narrative when you're explaining the game, this seems like a strong pitch. But then you actually play and you realize the game is a little closer to unscripted Monty Python sketches than you might have thought when you were preparing to play it for the first time. For example, once I was running Mutants and Masterminds, which is essentially like a superhero D&D game, I described our giant character walking and I was miming it out and I stepped on a cookie, and I described how he just kind of stumbled into a bakery in the game. And that became canon. And I will not tell the rest of that story today. Or in same game, a rich engineer called Boney Smark yelled at another rich engineer that had his own big suit of metal equipment to convince this definitely not Iron Man stand-in that he was richer than him in the middle of combat just to satisfy his character's ego. In fact, in my experience, jokes are such an integral part of the game. I use a mechanic I call punic inspiration. I stole it from one of my first DMs. If you tell a well-timed pun, a quip or whatnot, you get the inspiration if it's 5e, or depending on the system, some other mechanical bonus. Something that I later realized I would need to place a cap for one of my funniest players, because he had Monty Python reference, pun, he had like every joke that you could come up with in a row. It was incredible. So how did this happen? How did epic fantasy with intense combat and realistic world building become improv comedy in culture? What led to this moment? Quick interjection before I continue, I have started a separate channel for comedy. I made 2 on this one, and since they don't really match the rest of my material, I decided to make a more pseudo stand-up channel to separate my jokes from my D&D. I will not be producing it as hardcore as I focus on this channel, but it's a bit more relaxing to produce in that format, so I do want to keep making those. Remember, the first D&D games were built on wargaming, which is a very low joke hobby. I've done a small amount of wargaming, and now these jokes are integral enough with the game that they decided to produce a movie on the game. And in the movie, the first dragon that they introduced was morbidly obese in order to set up their characters making a bunch of quips, which I would argue doesn't really fit epic fantasy. I don't think how we got here is too complicated. I'm pretty sure it's simply what happens when friends gather, because it is a game with friends. Everyone knows someone that if this fellow has the opportunity for a pun, it will be taken, and since cognitive dissonance is really easy when the stone-lined corridors is a scrap of graph paper in front of you, why not be making jokes all the way through? And it works really well, because everyone has a good time. So now we have a baseline, but we're dungeon masters. How do we influence our games based on this? This will depend a bit on what your goal is. Do you want more jokes or less jokes? If you want more, I kind of already talked about it. I'll provide a small mechanical benefit for jokes. In 5e, it's inspiration. In a homebrew game, it was an entire extra action. This helps incentivize this form of engaging with the game. And once one person tells a joke, everyone's a bit more jovial, and another joke will likely follow. I sometimes, if I think it's necessary, will follow that up with planned puns. For example, I once had a group of monk apes. I was hoping a player would refer to them as monkeys as a pun setup. Unfortunately, no one spotted that one in the game, but you can make the jokes a lot lower hanging fruit, so it's a lot easier to make them, a lot easier to start getting the tone where you want it to be. And of course, you gotta be ready to make your own jokes. Don't make them too heavy-handed, but if you add your own jokes, everyone laughs, tone lifted, more jokes are more likely. But let's say you want to push in the reverse direction. How do we do that? And perhaps equally importantly, why would we want to? The why isn't too hard, my eldritch abominations are supposed to cause terror and are being met with some sly comments about tentacles, and I'd rather this be a serious situation. So how is the real question? Well, I'd start by actually communicating the intent for this part to be treated seriously, because it's 9 times more effective than awkward social engineering is for trying to make jokes, because jokes kind of have to be natural. Seriousness you can request. It's a lot more effective. And of course, adding a mechanical level acts as a less direct request for this or that or the other thing to occur. This would be the standard inspiration system, except a lot of people don't remember inspiration exists, so you have to reward it for one serious moment, and then maybe you get a follow-up and you can get that running. But perhaps another better plan is to remove some of the low-hanging fruit, because I was talking before about lowering the joke standard in order to get a more jovial tone. If you remove that, they are more likely to take it serious. Because, I mean, if you use a tentacle creature, what did you think was going to happen? Did you think the tentacle creature was not going to result in tentacle jokes? And finally, we can consider, and this exists on both fronts, if you or I are the problem. Because little known fact, cohesive narrative isn't necessarily harmed by jokes, and a strong comedy isn't really harmed by a interesting narrative. It's a matter of tone, and sometimes people just prefer a different tone. You're not the only person at the table. Thank you for your time. Check out the stand-up channel I started, and enjoy y'all's evening.